Firstly, before we start, I'd like to thank Darren for the welcome to country, and if I can also pay my respects to all the brother boys and sister girls who are part of my tribe that live in the Wajuri lands of Albury. It's an absolute pleasure to be here tonight. To Annette and Stuart and the boys, thank you for handing the baton over to me to be able to share my story with all of you. But before I start, I would like to share some barriers, some issues that one of my tribes face on a daily basis. 79.7% of transgender youth self-harm. And yes, that was me. Australian youth, which is still too high, goes at 10.9%. Transgender youth are 8 times more likely to self-harm. 48.1% of the transgender youth in this country attempt suicide. And yes, that was me. 2.4% of Australian youth attempt suicide. And yes, far too much. Over 20 times transgender youth will attempt suicide. 74.6% of transgender youth have depression. And yes, that was also me. 7.7% of the Australian youth have depression. Transgender youth are over 10 times more likely to suffer depression than the youth of this country. And finally, over 72% of transgender youth deal with anxiety. And yes, that was me. 7% of Australian youth also deal with anxiety. Again, transgender youth are 10 times more likely to suffer anxiety. Why is that the case? It's because of the discrimination of when we walk down the street, people laugh, people point, people sneer. They say we're mentally sick, we're not accepted, we're weird, insane, and we live in isolation. When I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria, my endocrinologist told me that she was heartbroken. For how many funerals that she went to for transgender youth. In my response, and we have become great friends, and I will say she's been one of the people in my tribe that has kept me here on this earth today. So I said to her, when I'm ready and I've overcome my own trauma, I'll make you a promise. I will stand, educate, I'll break down barriers to save lives. So my tribe can live as their true, authentic self within this amazing country. So for the next 15 minutes or so, please give me an ear. Please walk a mile in our shoes. I tell my story because I don't want any more car crashes like Danielle Laidley. I have to go back to the early 1970s when I first realised I was a little bit different. 6 or 7 years old, I stole my mum's nail polish. And for the more mature people in the audience who can remember Avon parties, that's where I stole it. And I raced off into the bathroom and I painted one nail. And for the first time in my life, I felt a calmness. I felt at peace, and it was scary because I didn't know what it was. There was many examples like this that I can talk through when I was in that place. My childhood wasn't a very good childhood, broken family, living with my grandparents, and then mum for a bit, and then dad for a bit. So no one really got to know who I was. I can look back now, since being diagnosed and really working on myself, I can now call those feelings little Danielle. In my early teenage years, at the time I didn't know, but a lot of depression and anxiety. I can look back now and say exactly that's what it was. To the point where I stopped playing sport. And a lot of it around that was to get back to that place to feel like me. Because my outside wasn't congruent with how I felt on the inside. Little Danielle would misbehave back in those times. Some days she would be very quiet, and I was able to operate, I'm talking about now in my sort of early teens, do what everyone does. Go to school, play sport. But there was other days where she would be roaring, loud, and wanting attention. And I couldn't give it to her. A, because I didn't know what it was. And in the early 1970s through to the mid-80s, Perth didn't have internet. Perhaps Albury didn't either. And then life changed. So here I am, carrying around little Danielle, walking side by side, still not really knowing and understanding what was happening to me. After giving up sport, I was lucky enough in year 10 to get picked in the WA state football team for year 10. And then I thought, what am I going to do? What do I do with little Danielle? So through the years playing football, there was a love-hate relationship. But what it did for me was football helped balance up my life with little Danielle. So if I put my head into my football career and worked hard, I could get through. And again, not telling anyone, not reaching out, keeping this all to myself. That was when the disease of addiction, which has been through my forefathers, struck me. I became a workaholic to balance up my life. From West Perth, there was then the West Coast Eagles. So as an 18-year-old parent, married at 19, little Danielle, trying to play VFL football as it was back then, I honestly don't know how I was able to do it. And particularly when I got into the AFL, there was fear, there was shame, there was embarrassment. And at times, even though I had 3 loving, beautiful children, at times I felt very much alone. When you play AFL football, you get put on a pedestal. Not because you're a good person or you're a bad person, because you're reasonable at a game that we love in this country. But on the other hand, as a transgender person, it's a minority group, and by some, we're seen as the scourge of society. So being a workaholic and making the most of my talents, good average talents, you build a brand, a persona. And that brand and that label for me was the junkyard dog. A nickname, I understand where it was coming from, with good intentions, but I hated it. And the reason was because it was even further away from the person that I knew who I was. Yes, there was the premierships. There was the parties. But when the lights went down, I was soulless. I thought it would fulfill me. But that wasn't the case. And the reality is, you can't outrun gender dysphoria. So as I got to the towards my end of my football career, I started to research. I had a better understanding of who I was and what I was, but too scared to seek professional help. The best way I can describe gender dysphoria is this. I'm sure a lot of you have been homesick over your life, whether you've gone away on business, whether you're gone on a holiday and you want to get back home to your pillow, to the smell of your sheets, to your couch, to your safe space, where you feel whole and complete. Basically, in its most basic premise, that is gender dysphoria. I left the AFL in 2015 to start to emotionally transition. I was struggling with no AFL to stick my head in to balance my life. And the disease of addiction reared its head in another way. Gambling, alcohol, and at 48 years of age, introduced to drugs for the first time in my life, which I'm so, to this day, embarrassed about. People who know me were the most surprised that I went down that path. But that was the depth of my despair. I was lonely, I was unwell, and my life spiralled. Eventually, when I was at my lowest ebb, I told my counsellor one day, it just came out, I think I have gender dysphoria. Within months, I was diagnosed towards the end of 2019. With my gender psych, we started to work on strategies to tell family and friends We even had a letter written up to the AFL to see if they would stand with me, support me, after 30 years of service. I was so bad, even though the weight had been lifted off my shoulders of being diagnosed and to finally realise that I wasn't crazy and I had this medical condition. It got to the point where I self-harmed. 5th of April 2020. Luckily, I was saved by a friend. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. The reality is, I chose to live, but on one condition. It had to be that I was me, totally, fully authentic and at peace with myself. I've made some mistakes along the way through that period. The darkest hours, the darkest months, the darkest year or so of my life. I rang the police one night. I was breaking an intervention order through a property dispute. It was a cry for help. I told them that I was breaking the intervention order and they better come and arrest me. And arrest me, they did. Within hours, when I was arrested, walking into the St Kilda police station, a dozen or so police officers decided that it was good fun to laugh, snigger, make fun of a person who is in the most vulnerable position of their life. They also took photos of me that went viral around Victoria, around the country, and around the world. My children, my family, my friends found out about Danielle when you did. The opportunity to sit down and have that conversation, I'll never get back. And it caused a hell of a lot of trauma. What I will say, and I've mentioned it before, a love-hate relationship with football. But as I stand here tonight, I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say football saved my life. When it all blew up, the people I was shamed, feared, embarrassed about knowing, they were the first people on the scene. They have supported, loved, not judged, and been there for me. Because they can see I'm happy and I'm healthy. We all make mistakes, and as I said, I've made some. But we can't live this life alone. And I can tell you that from experience. Any one of you who is here tonight can stand up and tell their story. Their story, your story, is not any less important than mine. Tonight's not about me. It's about you. In society, in any organisation, we talk about culture. The way I explain culture is this. In a village, there's pioneers, there's settlers, and there's outlaws. You all being here tonight tells me that you are pioneers, that you are leading the way in conversation, education, and connection. Then there's the settlers, the people who will go where the good leadership is. So this is your responsibility to talk, educate the settlers and make them pioneers. Then we have the outlaws. Invariably, if we all work together, they have to make a decision. They might be educated, they might want to be educated, they might want to know, they might want to understand. And we get more people in a caring, loving, supporting society. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, but everyone is human and everyone deserves a right to live their life and have respect. So thank you for allowing me up here tonight to share my life experiences, some trauma, some happy times. I'm certainly grateful to be here. This life, this night, your story, your pain, your hope, it matters. All of it matters. Thank you.